As the Finance Minister gets ready to give the final touches to Budget 2015, industry is hoping for bolder reform action to revive growth. Top on the list of priorities is the demand to spur investment by cutting the MAT rate, especially to boost manufacturing and to give a fillip to infrastructure projects. India.INC also wants the government to loosen its purse strings and up spending on big-ticket infra projects. Now, to boost consumption, business leaders want the Finance Minister to hike income tax exemptions and introduce new investment schemes, especially for gold as the underlying asset. To raise revenues, industry has called for an even more aggressive divestment program and the sale of loss-making public sector units, a further deferral of GAR and a reiteration of the government's commitment to end tax terrorism also on the wish list, along with the usual call for cutting wasteful expenditure. Joining us today to discuss what the Confederation of Indian Industry wants from the budget is the President, Ajay Sriram. Also with us, Chandrajit Banerjee, the Director General of the CII, Naresh Trehan, Chairman of CII's National Committee on Healthcare, and the Chairman and Managing Director of Medanta, the Medicity, and Sumant Sinha, Co-Chairman of CII's National Committee on Renewable Energy, and the Chairman and CEO of ReNew Power Ventures Private Limited. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Mr. Sriram, let me start by putting forward the list of recommendations that you've sent to the Finance Ministry. And I'm only talking now about the suggestions pertaining to the direct tax proposals. Corporate tax rate for domestic companies to be reduced to 25%, MAT levy to be moderated to 10%, DDT rate to be reduced to 10%, surcharge may be removed for all taxpayers. You want a dream budget, Ajay Sriram. Is this really possible given the fiscal constraints?
I'll be honest, the way we looked at it is what we think is good for the economy and for economic growth in India. We have talked about giving incentives or making it easier for investments to happen so that it becomes viable. So one side is the investment, as you rightly said, these 4-5 areas. But the other side, we've also said, is one must move towards increasing consumption and savings. And for that, we've recommended, instead of 2.5 lakhs as the cutoff for income tax, please raise that. Please give other benefits to individuals who can have savings or have money for investments.
You know, year after year, sir, we've discussed the possibility of MAT being done away with, or at least the MAT rate being reduced. This time around, do you believe that on MAT this year, perhaps we could finally see some relief? It's part of your recommendations.
In 2007, when MAT was implemented, it was 7.5%. By last year, it's come to 18.5%. And this is in the overall package of the government's aggressive push for the Make in India campaign. Ultimately, to make in India and get manufacturing to 25% of GDP from about 15% of GDP, we have to do something different. There's a phrase which makes a lot of sense. If you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. So we have to make a change.
Okay, Sumant Sinha, let me just take that point forward with you, because one of the suggestions and recommendations is that MAT rate should actually be lowered to about 10%, or if not exempted altogether as far as large infrastructure projects are concerned. Given this government's initiative on the Make in India, the manufacturing in India, and of course the smart city project and so on and so forth, and the sector that you're yourself involved with, where the government is trying to attract private sector as well as foreign direct investment, do you see relief coming in, especially as far as the infrastructure projects are concerned?
Well, you know, Shereen, it's hard to say whether in fact we will get the relief or not. I think there is, as Ajay said, there's a very strong rationale for giving us the relief. And it's not really just us. I think if you look at it from the government standpoint, if they take the view that if they reduce the MAT rate by 10%, it immediately brings down the cost of setting up new projects, for example. Prices to some extent come down. It hopefully therefore leads to more investments taking place. And if more investments take place, there's more job creation, and the government gets its revenues in, in perhaps more indirect manners, but certainly does get the revenue as well.
Well, I don't know if the government is going to decide to pick the healthcare sector as one of the sectors that they would want to focus on as far as this budget is concerned. But Dr. Trehan, we've been talking about infrastructure status for the healthcare sector for the longest time now. Do you believe that maybe this time around you won't go away disappointed?
I think that there are other ways of making up for not having the money to, or the amount of money that you should be spending. And the thing to do is, one, to align all the assets on the ground that are available today, whether they are in the government, whether they are in the private or in the NGO sector, and make them perform better. And I think 50% more healthcare can be provided if we do it in tandem in an integrated fashion.
Let me ask you two direct questions. A, do you believe that there is going to be any possibility of seeing a hike as far as the health budget is concerned? Because we're woefully low, just about a little over 1%, lower than 2% of our GDP actually goes into healthcare spending. Do you see any possibility or any room for a hike in healthcare spending? Will that come by way of a healthcare cess, which is what has been discussed and debated over the last couple of months? We don't know if it's coming or not. And thirdly, do you believe that beyond giving some income tax exemptions as far as medical expenses are concerned, this is not really going to be a sector on top of the government's agenda?
No, first of all, it should be, because it's a very important agenda for the disenfranchised people of our country who do not have access to healthcare today. It's a very important issue to address. Now, I do believe that there will not going to be a major increase in the health budget. If it is, most welcome that 3 years or 4 years of our demand gets fulfilled. But I would not be disappointed if it doesn't happen. But like you want to make it accessibility easier for people. And like we have suggested, increase the RSBY from 30 to 60,000 rupees. Give a 2 lakh cover to each family per year for catastrophic illness. This is not going to cost the government more than 9,000 crores, because 9,000 crores can be contributed by the people to get into the scheme. The things that are also on the front burner are to give larger exemption from 15,000 to 25,000 for healthcare deduction, and also for the insurance, encourage insurance and give a higher deduction. I think these are indirect measures where the government doesn't lose anything.
I agree with you, sir, but as I said, I hope that this time around you won't go away disappointed as far as the healthcare sector's aspirations are concerned, because these are issues that we've been talking about for very, very long when it comes to dealing with budget-related issues. But CV, let me ask you now, as on two specific issues, on retrospective taxation, where this government has reiterated several times over that it intends to end tax terrorism. It doesn't intend to go back to an era of retrospective taxation. Do you expect the finance minister to solidify that commentary and reiterate that commentary? And specifically on the issue of GAR, I know that industry has sought another 2-year deferral. Do you believe that the government will give in to that demand and defer GAR by 2 years, or perhaps even indefinitely?
I think this is not the time for GAR to be implemented, and there is no doubt about that the government would look at it very positively. And we are looking at when the growth really picks up, when the economy really picks up, that we will really look at that GAR may be considered at that point in time. And I don't see a reason why the government would not really look at it favorably. And looking at the other areas of kickstarting investments, I think there is where we need to have a real out-of-the-box thinking, and there is where we will look at the budget to be something which is going to be very path-breaking. And if we can look at assets which are locked in, more than 2 lakh crores of funds which are lying not invested in the public sector, the public sector assets for such the SIC units, if these are liquidated and are redeployed into asset creation, obviously that is into infrastructure, we will see manufacturing also pick up.
Ajay Sriram, what is the possibility of this big impact budget? You know, you've talked about a disinvestment program, a more disinvestment program. You say that the government should actually target 60,000 crore rupees. Year after year, the government falls short and woefully short of its disinvestment target. Year after year, we talk about how the government should actually sell off its non-core assets, sell off loss-making public sector companies. This government hasn't really clarified its position on what to do as far as loss-making PSUs are concerned. In fact, one of the recommendations is to keep these alive and get the public sector companies that are making money to pump in more money into loss-making public sector companies to try and revive them. Do you really anticipate any big ticket, big impact ideas as far as revenue mobilization is concerned?
In terms of disinvestment, first I must compliment the government that what they have achieved this year of almost 25,000 crores is the maximum they have achieved ever. We've recommended 60,000 crores because we feel that fiscal consolidation and the financial health of the government is very important. So unless they get the money in the hands, they will not have the money to spend at the right place. So one is this, where we recommended Please look at disinvestment more aggressively. And also, I'll add to that, please don't look at disinvestment of 5%, 10% only, where let's say LIC or other companies buy the shares and you get the money from there. But let's be logical. Why does the government have to run a corporation like Air India? I mean, give that away, you'll get good money for it, and there are many other assets of a similar nature. Then in terms of fiscal consolidation per se, we feel, yes, we require subsidized food, etc., for a certain section of society.
Yeah.
Please limit it to that section of society. Why do people like us get a ration card? Why not do it only to those below the poverty line?
Because the Expenditure Reform Commission has also recommended several measures that you were talking about, the direct benefit transfer scheme, Aadhaar, rationalizing subsidies, whether it's LPG and other, expenditures. But do you believe that post the Delhi debacle, we will see this government move full throttle as far as some of these schemes are concerned? Will it go in for that big ticket rationalization as was expected? Do you expect bold reform on subsidy rationalization?
I think subsidy rationalization, to get it to who it is supposed to go to, is a direction which is a win-win for everyone, because no one is losing out. A policy decision, what I mentioned earlier, of giving it to only those below the poverty line, that's a policy decision. But to make it targeted, for instance, I was told the total subsidy today on kerosene is about 30,000 crores. It is estimated, I'm saying it's only an estimate, that the loss is almost 40 to 50% because of theft and leakage, etc. Now, can that come on to the Aadhaar card or direct transfer like they've done for LPG? That will automatically reduce the government spending, give it to the people who deserve it, and government saves money. So it's a win-win across the board.
Absolutely.
So
I agree with you. It requires political will and political courage. On my part, I've given away the LPG subsidy that I'm still technically entitled to, so at least I've made a contribution to that. But Sumant Sinha, on the issue of the GST, because this is going to be the other big one that people would want clarity on, the hope is, of course, that this government will be able to take the bill forward in this session of Parliament. But from GST, realistically, what's the expectation? Do you believe he will stick to a 2016 rollout timeline?
I think, Shereen, that the government is obviously very serious about getting GST now active, and I think they'll do whatever is in their power to actually make sure that it gets implemented at the earliest possible opportunity. More than anything else, apart from making life a lot easier for people like us, it also actually hopefully takes us 10-15 rankings further in the ease of doing business ranking. I think the states are mostly on board, so I think it's now just a question of introducing into Parliament and getting it passed.
CB, on the issue of indirect tax proposals, I know industry doesn't really have a long list here. In fact, as far as the peak rate is concerned or the service tax rate is concerned, the hope is that the government will stick to the duties as they are currently today. But do you believe that there could be a possibility of a hike in the service tax rate?
No, I think, what we would really like to see, obviously, one doesn't expect a hike, but yes, we understand and that there would be a sort of we will see a sort of a status quo, but what we would also like to see is some movement towards GST, which is a wider coverage of the tax. I think that's going to be much more important. While we are postponing the GST, one would in fact look at CST to be brought down from 2% to 1% for the time being, till the time you make GST really implemented. That is, and we would like to look at a roadmap, say, for instance, of April 1st, 2016. That's what you talked about.
Doctor, and let me start getting wrap-up comments from each of you, and let me start by asking you, to your mind, what would be the big highlight? We've discussed a lot of the possibilities. We've discussed a long wish list that industry has put forward to the finance minister. But even if 10 or 15% of this wish list were done, would that for you mean an 8 on 10 budget? And what would be the big disappointments for you?
Well, like I said, some increase, some relief for accessibility, which will make it happen, and also some of the pending issues. We got infrastructure status for healthcare, but then the MAT came in, so MAT has to be taken away if we are going to increase infrastructure build out. And most importantly, healthcare is one of those industries where employment is very intense. So if you want to give employment to 10 million people in the next 5 years that we want to, we have to encourage healthcare, the delivery system, the pharmaceutical, the manufacturing. So I think this sector needs to be looked at carefully and favorably, because it's a win-win for everybody. The day you open a hospital, all your employees become taxpayers. So you're not losing, you're just postponing by a couple of years in a quantum increase in your revenue from the healthcare business.
Okay, Sumant Sinha, what should be the #1 priority for the finance minister?
Well, I think that the finance minister is definitely going to hew a path of fiscal discipline. So I think they are going to try to target to get to 4.1 this year and 3.6% of GDP for next year. And I think the reason is that the RBI has them on a fairly strict watch. And I don't think the RBI is going to lower rates if it doesn't feel the government is on a fiscal discipline sort of path. And I think lowering cost of interest rate is, I think, one of the most important things for us. The second thing is somehow or the other, the finance minister has to find a way of giving some fiscal incentives to certain sectors, whether they be healthcare or our sector or any other sectors that the government decides to go after, without at the same time compromising on fiscal discipline, which means that they have to find ways of raising more funding from somewhere else, which, as Ajay was saying earlier, could be coming in from a higher disinvestment target. And I think even 60,000 crores, while it is a higher number, in a good market can certainly be achieved, and not letting the subsidy bill go up on a nominal basis to the extent of inflation. I think if bit better targeting is also possible. And so we could have a situation where the government could make these macro trade-offs, give incentivization to certain sectors on the basis of promising growth or having further growth, while at the same time keeping the fiscal side under control and thereby reducing interest rates from the RBI going forward.
Okay. Ajay Sriram, you know, the world at this point in time is divided into two camps, the stimulus hawks and the stimulus doves. I know from a reading of the recommendations that you've sent into the government, you're clearly on the dove side. You would like the government to loosen its purse strings, spend more as far as infrastructure is concerned, get those big ticket projects underway. But, you know, the dilemma is that A, there is issues as far as revenue mobilization are concerned, and B, you know, someone has got to pick up the bill, maybe not tomorrow, but a few months and a few years down the line, and then what happens? So is it really prudent to be looking at the government to loosen its purse strings today?
I think if we were to see what are examples in the world, from 2008 onwards, one was the US example, where they went in with QE, and they actually went in for stimulating the economy. The other is the European example, where they actually went in on austerity mode. And we've seen what's happened to both these regions. So I think going the US way, where you stimulate the economy through investments, but correct investments. I think today, by God's grace, with this government, I had the privilege of traveling with the Prime Minister of Japan, US and other countries. People are willing to give the money. So I think implementation of infrastructure projects, to my mind, is a key area for kick-starting the economy. And I do hope in this budget, some government money is put aside for certain infrastructure projects, because that needs to be kick-started. There are, unfortunately, a lot of PPAs signed in the past which have got stuck. We have to find a solution to that too.
CB, I know that you do a lot of dipstick surveys at CII, so let me ask you this. You know, despite what the new GDP numbers look like at 7.4%, which most people seem to have trouble believing or at least comprehending, what does your survey tell you? When are we likely to see a real turnaround in the economy? When are we likely to see consumption starting to pick up? And when are we likely to see capex picking up? Because it hasn't happened so far.
We are looking at anywhere between 7.5 to 8 to be our target of growth, which is quite achievable for next year, and 7.4% is when we are ending this year. That's the type of calculations that we are getting as feedback. And as we see, investment has come back onto the table and most of the boardrooms. So we do look at growth picking up in the coming quarters very strongly, and the end of the third quarter is where we are really going to see, which is after the budget, a real upturn in terms of investments flowing in and growth really kick-starting. Since the last budget, the Prime Minister has really talked about Make in India and ease of doing business, and I think in both these issues we will see a lot coming into the budget to give a big push to Make in India, which is again a lot to do with manufacturing, and that's really from where growth will come. And also, we covered the discussion on tax, where we'll make a tax more predictable and much more easier and transparent, which will also give a strong signal internationally.
Well, let's see whether the government comes good on a lot of the expectations that industry has, but we will know on the 28th of February when Finance Minister Arun Jaitley stands up to present his second budget. It's going to be a tough balancing act. He's promised to get back to the path of fiscal consolidation or continue on the path of fiscal consolidation. How does he do that and spur growth and stimulate the economy at the same time? Where does he get the money from? Those are the big questions that we leave you with. My many thanks to all our panelists for joining us from the headquarters of the Confederation of Indian Industry to take us through CII's budget wish list. Thanks very much for watching.